Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Common Table. My name is Natanya Escata, and thank you for joining us in this conversation for the people and for the planet, for the common green. Today, we have a Filipino photographer named Gab Mejia. He is an award-winning photographer, a great adventurer, and someone that loves to protect and conserve and represent the planet and the people. And he's been incredibly inspiring as a creative and as an artist. And he's, I don't think I'll be able to give it full justice. So, I've been so inspired and so amazed by your work and your mission. And so, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, thanks, Natanya, for having me here. I guess I wear many hats, if I would say. I'm a conservation photographer, and I do more really on freelance conservation photography, and as a National Geographic explorer as well, and really going out and about in wilderness and documenting wildlife, landscapes, wetlands, mountains, and oceans to really raise awareness and make sure that people are aware about it, and to educate others really through different platforms as visual storyteller. So yeah, I don't know. It's really the stories, I guess, that I documented and the places that I document that can fully introduce me, because all the photographs that I've taken are just really kind of the memory, or, kind of what each of the moments are, just what makes me who I am. Like all of the experiences, all of the learnings as well from indigenous communities, from, even wildlife behavior, through the mentors and community that I've grown up with. I think that's, the best introduction I could possibly say. Yeah.
Right. And I noticed that just last year, there's so many great things that I think you've been accredited to. Like they placed you for Forbes 30 under 30, which is really impressive. And, a lot of your work was published on National Geographic, WWF, and UNDP. And so I feel like a lot of us, we choose to do environmentalism and to show our activism in different ways. And you've evidently been doing that by traveling around the world and taking images of people and places. And so why did you choose photography to do that?
I guess it was really kind of more of an inspiration as well from my dad. I was a mountaineer first before I was really kind of into photography. So I guess the moments that I've experienced growing up, hiking with my dad, going to the mountains, going to the wetlands, I wanted to kind of share those moments. But in the same time as experiencing that kind of scenario with my father, with all these adventures, I also saw the changes that were happening in kind of the places that I grew up in, the mountains in Makiling, the mountains in Bataan, in the provinces. And it made me, see the changes that were happening and how lucky I was. And I felt that kind of sense of gratitude that I was able to see it at that time. And now going back to these places that we once used to travel with my dad, kind of showed me the reality that was happening in our nature, that it's not just all beautiful. And, as much as I want to really document the beautiful and amazing, ecosystems and wildlife that we have, the camera really was more of a source, like that really changed my life, that changed the course of direction, because it was just purely in a way that I wanted to capture moments with my family and friends and the beautiful places. But I realized that, there's a deeper power through photography, through visual storytelling, when I was showing the images and sharing it to organizations when I was in college and to friends and family, that it could inspire and it could have made an impact with people. And what better use than using this tool to really amplify the stories and the realities that we're facing in the environment, the harsh realities and atrocities that we're facing in the environment. So that's what really kind of pushed me for photography. Like, it didn't just change my life, but it also allowed me to see the world and understand it in a more perceptive and more listening ear.
Right. Was there a particular memory or, story that really sparked it, like where it really became not just mountaineering and really like, oh, I'm going to turn this into a mission. I'm going to use this for like a really deeper
I think it was
purpose.
really facets of all of these things happening not just like being in school, university, learning environmental engineering. I'm studying civil engineering, specializing in environmental engineering, joining organizations like UP Marine Biological Society, and going out on adventures with my mountaineering friends in the university, and even volunteering. The times that I would volunteer with environmental organizations like Worldwide Fund for Nature. It was all these things that were happening at once. It wasn't just like one moment, I would say. It was kind of a gradual building of how I was being educated more about nature. So it wasn't just like a one-time thing. I think that one-time thing when I was 13, when I saw my first mountain in Malaysia, which I honestly failed to reach the summit, that was kind of the moment that, pushed me into it in a way, because I felt like there was some deeper connection that exists in nature that I never felt anywhere else. But that moment kind of was the spark, and all of the things that I've mentioned a while ago was kind of the logs that you put on a campfire that would keep the fire going.
First things that I heard about you was your time in the Agusan Marsh marshlands, and you spent quite a while there, 2018 to 2020, 2020, and so that of all the places that you could have spent so much time in, like what prompted you to really dedicate so much time and effort with Agusan Marsh?
One thing was I was already kind of fascinated with wetlands, which Agusan Marsh is. It's the largest wetland in the Philippines and one of the most megabiodiverse ecosystems that we have. So I guess for just a short background on wetlands, so it's like, an ecosystem that's inundated with water seasonally, and it represents like marshes, swamps, rivers, lakes, any water body. There's like the terrestrial and as well as the coastal wetlands. And Agusan Marshlands is the largest of it in the Philippines. And prior to that, I guess that really fascination with wetlands that I saw, it was in the Gabaldon floodplains that I really saw the power and beauty of these patterns of wetlands, how it protects the communities from flooding, how it serves as as a natural climate ecosystem wherein it absorbs carbon, and you have like other kinds of wetlands like peatlands that absorb 3 times more carbon than all our world's forests. So, but the deeper thing was, I don't know, it was just like kind of the wetlands chose me or something, kind of that feeling when you right. Like what they say in like a wildlife biologist, right? Like it's not you that chooses the species, but it's more of like the species that choose you, that you want to protect. It's like there's so many species around the world, right? And with wetlands, it's kind of that feeling. And I was actually reading a book recently, how everything. This book called Wolves and Honey by Susan Moreau, and she was saying how science, mathematics, physics really started from wetlands, when how the Egyptians, arithmetic through Pythagoras, really saw wetlands, like for example, kind of the ripples of the waters in the Nile River, how they would measure the sun and time and seasons depending on the floodplains, and they use that as building stones, like their perception of what they were seeing in nature, to translate it into arithmetic, through chemistry, alchemy, and all that stuff in early ages. And it's such an interesting thing to note, like how almost a lot of things around the world really came from the wetlands, like this greater knowledge that the Egyptians saw, and that fascination really grew and grew more. And even now, I'm like, actually, we're going to be back there in the end of February, hopefully to celebrate World Wetlands Day. And yeah, in a more local context, I guess that the feeling of wetlands is like the Agusan Marshlands. It's the largest wetland in the Philippines. It's a biodiversity hotspot where migratory birds coming from the East Asian and Australasian flyway would go here and nest. And what's more important, it's an ecosystem that there's an indigenous community living in the center, in the heart of the Agusan Marshlands. So they're called the Manobo tribe. And they have floating houses right in the middle of a lake, coexisting for decades and centuries with this beautiful ecosystem. And they have this kind of connection, a deeper connection with, the plants, the crocodiles. They revere that some of their indigenous textile patterns are even patterns based from the spines of the crocodile. Like lolong. There's like this great news in 2013 about lolong, one of the largest saltwater crocodile that was ever recorded, and it was in the Guinness Book Records, and it was found in the Agusan Marshlands. And it's crazy, like how all of these things that align, right?
Wow.
Like how we have a greater knowledge as similar to the Egyptians here, all the way to the Agusan Marshlands, and coexist with that. Isn't like that a beautiful thing, that how it traces way back into the past, into the history, and possibly the future of our world as our direction is going, right? With the climate action and climate crisis, of how we should embrace the indigenous communities and embrace the traditional knowledge that we have long swept under the rug. So that really kind of, there's such an inspiring community.
Right. And I had no idea.
There's just really such an inspiring community, and the whole place is this Jurassic, like the moment you enter the lake, and suddenly as you go out of the river, you would go into this open landscape with trees, local endemic trees called bangkal, that would just, are sparse and sprawled around the whole lake. And there's just this village sitting in the middle, with people wearing these red traditional wear. And like, it's just such a magical place, and like how this place exists in the Philippines, and not a lot of people are aware about this certain ecosystem and this whole community.
Right. I had no idea that marshlands and like wetlands go back that far. Like when you were talking about going all the way back to Egyptian times, and like that, it's not even just the fact that it's managed to stretch its way to the Philippines, like just that far. Like I found this thing last night when I was reading about this one in particular, like Agusan Marsh, and because it spans so widely. It's 100,000 acres. It's protected and known at an international level because it's just of so much utmost international importance because of the potential impact that it has. And so I do agree with you. It's such a pity that we don't, well, I certainly didn't know about it up until like a few weeks ago, right? Like we have so much biodiversity and great ecosystems in the Philippines that are very much worth protecting. And there's this one article that I found your photo in, and so I read it, and they were talking about wetlands. And so it was describing how we often know forests and rainforests as the lungs of the earth, right? Because they're important sources of oxygen. And then there it wrote that wetlands are described as kidneys because of, how they filter out and, upstream pollutants that go into the areas. And so I think, maybe since you've seen it up close, and I assume you've had, great conversations about it, why do you think we don't hear as much about wetlands and areas like these, as much as we hear about forests and rainforests? And though they're of great importance as well, right? Like this is very similar to conversations we've recently had about coral reefs, like we haven't brought them out into the light as much as we should have, because they're of great help and abundance to the planet and to the people. So what do you think about why we haven't spoken much about
Well, there's a lot of studies that actually tell why there's this gap with wetlands, and one of the main reasons why is really that wetlands are so close to us. It's in close proximity within our livelihoods, within our homes, that people don't see it anymore as kind of a natural space, because like even rice paddies are considered wetlands, lakes, rivers, and these areas, these ecosystems are so close that we kind of, undermine it already. It's part of life. It's just basic life. Like, for example, in Metro Manila, the river, Pasig River, is a wetland, and all the water that we get is from the Ipo watershed, but it's one of the most deforested and inundated areas. And it's because it's so close with us. There's a lot of conflict and tension that can go with the fraud around wetlands, right? It's not so remote or as magical that you have to travel all the way to the reef or the ocean to see it. And honestly, like the thing is, it's not maybe as charismatic as our deep blue reef, or colorful reefs, or deep blue oceans, or as charismatic as glacial peaks like Mount Everest, or right, or the seven summits around the tallest mountains around each continent. It's like wetlands are kind of seen more as it's there and it always will be there, and that's not the case. And I think that's really, we're not, also in the fact that we're not as much educated about wetlands. It's not part of our curriculums. It's not, this kind of environmental education. There's also another gap with that, with students. So we kind of only see wetlands when, we're actually invested in it, and we're not even trained to see it when we're growing up, or we're not trained to, in a way, educated enough or to be able to appreciate it better. And it's only like, for example, like the movie of Shrek, right? That was like about a swamp and the wetlands, how magical it was. So that is actually a kind of the mainstreaming it, right? Like, oh my God, Shrek, wetlands are, this magical place with ogres and fairies. And sometimes it's true, this kinds of mythological kind of wetlands also kind of deter other people from seeing it. It's honestly not just a muddy place. It's it could also be haunted, like with spirits, duendes or diwatas. So there's a lot of things that are kind of hampering people from knowing more about wetlands. But there's just so much beauty in it, and I guess it's like and also the fact that we've destroyed it. A lot of the wetlands here around the Philippines are degraded, or they don't even look, they're dry, lakes have dried up. So, or they just become into farm, or they just turn into palm oil plantations or agricultural rice. So you kind of have this ecosystem that's so important, as you've met, like, yeah, it's a kidney of the earth. And then suddenly you're just kind of eroding it all, right? Decreasing all the areas where people could actually appreciate it. Like even Pasig River, if this river was kept alive, or was rehabilitated and cared for well, people would notice and really go to Pasig River and appreciate it, right? Not just for a dump, or as a place where you could put your sewage water, but as a place that you can create, rest, go on a swim, like a lot of European towns actually in Switzerland would have rivers like that. It's clean, and and it's kind of, like this kind of cultural behavior or cultural impressions that we have on wetlands have also hampered that, have widened that rift between truly caring more about them.
It's really interesting that you brought up the Pasig River. So I think it was like 2 months ago, I did a project for university, and we were talking about rehabilitating areas like that, and exactly what you mentioned about how we could actually utilize the space in a communal setting, right, where people can not only respect it but also appreciate and then live around it. And look, my group and I, we had this like zoomed out image, and Pasig River is massive, and it's connected to other areas, right, in Manila, and it's basically declared dead, biodiversity wise. Like it's just like, it's really impossible for anything to live there now because of how polluted it is. But we had this project where it's actually technically possible to bring kind of a sponge city introduced to Manila by utilizing the Pasig River. And so there was this idea of like actually building within and kind of on top of it in a way that has the water and sewage going elsewhere, but that space, rather than just leaving it there, it could be like a communal space for people. And when it rains, rather than everything flooding and everything getting a lot messier and being polluted, it is able to absorb it much faster and slower and into the appropriate places. And so there is actually a lot of things that we can do if we just in the first place realize that it's of utmost importance and value and so much potential. And so I think it also goes back to like the power of storytelling, like right, like what you were saying about Shrek, we've all seen Shrek, and so in a sense we've had a kind of representation of what wetlands could look like, and when it's portrayed like that, it was successful in giving it a message, right? Like we managed to absorb a message and representation of wetlands through Shrek. Whether it was right or wrong, or gave it justice, it still managed to bring something to us, as we watch. And so I think, that's where we have to be careful in how we represent things, and really be able to respect it, right? And so that's really interesting how you brought up Shrek. I never even thought of that. Yeah. And so, yeah, I never thought of comparing it to Shrek. Like, that's actually, it's storytelling, right? Like, it's representation.
Yeah.
Right. Why? So, well, with especially like Agusan Marsh, or maybe just in general, what is it that they're facing that has been preventing them from being at their best state? What has been harming them and their communities?
Well, one is the major effects and impacts of the climate change. Droughts, prolonged droughts that are causing the rivers and lakes to the annual water levels of the rivers and lakes that they use as tributaries for their homes, where their homes are decreasing. So it's harder to get into their floating lake, the sacred lakes like Lake Panlabuhan, which is kind of the more central lake out in Agusan Marshlands, because all the tributaries are now drying up, and you can't, canoe and put a pump boat all the way to that place, because it would, destroy the boat, or the boat can't really pass, and it's inaccessible. So you have that issue as well, and because of this drying lake, people are giving up that way of life of the traditional way of life, using the canoes, or we call it barotos in their language, and how these things, it's not something that they've contributed at all. They've been coexisting with this marsh, and now they're facing this whole brunt of climate crisis, of droughts, of super typhoons. Like last year, there was a typhoon, a super typhoon, and it may have affected. And you also have this socioeconomic pressures like mining, palm plantation, that's ruining the quality of the water of the Agusan Marsh. And factoring all these compounding problems and issues that they're facing, for a community, it's where's the justice, right? Like, they're asking for social justice, and like our country as well, we're facing all these super typhoons and all these damages that's causing so much economic loss, and it's a problem, very complex problem. As we could go on and on this forever, but there are communities that, like the indigenous communities of the Manobo living in the Agusan Marsh, communities that are underserved because of the systems that are in place that's allowing them to be kept in this place. And it's a really unfortunate thing. Like, and for us, people who may have the privilege, who may have the needs to be able to help our fellow Filipinos, because they are also our fellow Filipinos, even if they speak a different language, they're an indigenous community. We need to be really thinking out of the box and really thinking together, like, as how these communities have thought about nature, of being interconnected, right? It's really a really tough situation, especially seeing like when we were documenting the blazing fires that was destroying the Agusan Marsh. Honestly, like, there are times when you would get PTSD or like post-traumatic because of the impacts of it, of seeing their communities run into rubble and turn into ash and smoke and fire. And it's just so unfair, right? Like, it's just so unfair. And what did we do to deserve this? What did they do to deserve it, right? But it's not just even about like putting kind of a moral code or a high horse on this issue, that but it's really just more about listening to each other and caring for each other, that we need to work on together, because at the end of the day, lives are going to be lost. Cultures are going to be swept away. Cultures will start disappearing. Our identity as Filipinos, our sense of diversity, cultural diversity, our sense of all of these factors in. So it's not just, about the destruction of the marsh, but as the destruction of our society, is the destruction of our humanity as our being as a Filipino, as a human. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with you that it is definitely very unfair. I think to hear and then see that Filipino areas and communities are greatly affected. We're essentially frontliners in with climate change, with global warming, and I think it's painful because one thing that I heard at COP26 was that the Philippines is only responsible for 0.33% of all the emissions. So that's a third of a percent, and yet we feel the attack, right? We feel our land drying up, and we also experience it overflowing and overflooding. And it's like you said, it's people's lives, and it's drastic. And I think it goes back to we had that one viral moment, I don't know when it was recently, that we talked about resilience, right? Filipino resilience, how we would applaud, and we would kind of glorify, romanticize Filipino resilience, and yet actually when we think about it, that I think that could be a wrong way of looking at it and addressing the situations that are happening in the Philippines, right? How do you feel about that? When that exploded, it kind of was quite eye-opening. It's like, what happens when we do glorify and we praise our fellow communities for simply being resilient over climate change or natural disasters? And
that's really also another issue that kind of would in depth more with the cultural context of how we see resilience, right? And I do agree that we have to kind of reimagine or redefine what it means, what resiliency means, right? And more than resiliency is really like, I think, more than resiliency, I think we have to really think ahead. It's really, we have to be more proactive with whatever decisions that we're making with our government, whatever things that we're building right now. Every small act and every more systemic kind or macro scale solutions that we have to be doing it already. Like in COP26, like we're running as much as I don't want to be a cynic or really kind of really going into the gloom and doom. We really have to think outside of the box and really act. There's no time to waste. Time is really of the essence and of the urgency. And but as much as it's really hard that probably our society and our world is really going into this drastic changes that's impacting so many lives. We kind of have to be more critical, sense of optimism in how we see the outlook in order to provide solutions, because we have to really go beyond our way of cultural context and the way we see things as a nation. And I can really go deeper into this, like how the sense of nation, we don't have a sense of nation. That's why resiliency would never work, because we are not tied together in how we are as a country. We're so tribalistic. We're still tribalistic, and you have provinces and the economic gap so huge, so wide, and so we have to rebuild that sense of what makes us a nation and really start on from there if we want to become resilient. Because even if you have governments creating their own solutions with each other, it's just going to create more schism. It's going to create more competition, like, what is our sense of a nation that could make us resilient, right? Or even think of what resiliency is when we're not even as a nation as in the first place. How polarized we are with each other, how we're not listening to each other, how instead of LGUs or like government from different provinces are helping each other, they're competing with each other, and they're not really creating a vision and a plan for how our country would look out in the next the next 50 years. Because at this point, like even going to political about this, especially with campaign elections happening, you could still see how we have. Can I be political here? Or like can I?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay,
I hope so.
but yeah, like
I'd like to hope so. I mean,
yeah,
this is for the
well, I mean
common
everything's
people.
political, but I mean to be more adamant about it or more aggressive, I guess, about it is that we have candidates who are, have a very bad track, a very evil track that's not even dumb, but really pure evil of how everyone's capitalizing on disasters, on typhoons. We're getting in more in debt and all of these things. They don't care. Like we have leaders who don't care about what our country is, because in the first place, they also think that our country is not our country and is not a nation in the first place. So why would I care about, Mindanao, or why would you care about other regions? We've grown up with this kind of political context wherein we're still subduing ourselves away from the post-colonial effects, right? As a former colony of Spain and as a former oppressed state by the U.S., right? It just goes deeper into what is about resiliency, and it's not just the media's fault. There's like so many layers behind it that we can't just simplify that people should look resiliency in this way or in that way, right? It goes beyond that.
Right. I think also what triggered that point was what happened at COP as well, right? Like when our president, our current president, didn't even present himself at COP26, and honestly, I'd like to say that even if he did, it wouldn't have actually changed anything significantly, at least, or in a way that would bring us anywhere close to results that we would have wanted and really desired. And that's, I think the worst part about it is that it's not shocking in a sense that it is expected. It's quite a pessimistic way to look at it, but I think it's quite realistic considering everything that's happened and how it's been running so far. And I think, like you said, it's quite polarized. As a country, we're not acting like a nation. We're not treating one another in a sense that we could be this a nation altogether cohesively. I think that's one of the reasons why, we had Filipino representatives and activists standing outside, marching outside of COP. Also, we have creatives and content creators and informational platforms, people that do documentaries outside government funding, do outside work like that. I think it's because we want to take kind of the control as well. We want to lead it and not just expect from governments and expect from large groups of power to start the change or act the change or actually contribute to incidents, like whether it's relief, from natural disasters or for even future needs. Like you said, like, are we even prepared for what's going to happen by 2050? We're not prepared. And it's devastating because, like we mentioned earlier, the Philippines is the front line. And it's like we're not focused on the right things as a country, at least. And so one of the things I wanted to ask you is, I mean, evidently you're still taking images and you're still taking photos, and I'm still here trying to talk my way out of things and explain things and make posts. And yet, but the more we do it, the more we get exposed to how bad it is. It's really bad in a local context and in a global context. There are some progress here and there, but I mean, overall, it's bad. It's looking really bad. And that's just the truth. And so for you, like, how do you do it? It's just plain out. Like, I mean, how do you do that? What keeps
really
you
the community
going?
I always say, like, community is the greatest inspiration that you can ever have. It's the greatest investment that you can ever make while you're young. And just listening, because I guess one of the foundations of community is really about listening to each other, about truly listening to each other and hearing other people's voices and hearing others' opinions that are well based and scientifically based, like opinions that in there's a lot of things with community that keeps me going, that really gives me hope in a way, seeing amazing people, as you mentioned, like youth leaders, activists marching, Filipino activists marching in COP26, photographers creating conservation work, and youth leaders, youth-run NGOs and other NGOs all working together on the same advocacies and same cause to kind of alleviate or make our lives and people's lives much more credible, or like really livable. Um, it's really tough, this work, and sometimes there are days and months that would go by and like say, oh my god, I don't want to do this anymore, but once you're in this community, you just find the strength and kind of find the courage to be together. And this is kind of the sense of, I guess, the resiliency that comes, the true meaning of resiliency, right? If you're in a community that holds each other together, you'll keep bouncing and try to keep more providing real solutions and really trying to make a greater impact with for the environment and for the planet and for people, of course.
Yeah, I think it's really that. And I think in one conversation that I had, we were talking about this, like the power of community, especially the whole climate situation, and particularly youth communities, the ones that have just kind of holistically found themselves, with one another. And we found it interesting how we don't particularly have leaders, we have inspirations, right? But we've been keeping it as a community rather than like, we have a leader and we're following it in one way, right? We come as it, as we are, and in different fields and passions and methods. And I think that's what makes it. That's what helps with resiliency, right? Like it's diverse, it's different. They come from different backgrounds as well. And so, yeah. And I have another question for you. I was reading one of the things that you wrote for the Manila Times, and one of them was titled "Turning Passion into Purpose." And like you mentioned earlier, you were climbing that mountain in Borneo when you were really, really young, and it was such a tedious task, and you didn't finish it, and it managed to eventually impact you, and help you become the person that you are now, convey someone that conserves and takes these images for purpose. And so I think now a lot of us, a lot of youth are also taking up a very similar path of wanting to create things and start things and join movements that have deeper purpose. And so how do you think we can be more encouraging as a community, as a country, maybe even in motivating, helping, and encouraging fellow youth when as they climb their own versions of summits?
I guess if there's any advice that I could really for anyone aspiring and really want to be exploring the world, really trying to make a difference, I think it just goes like, as cheesy as it sounds, it's like to be kind and to really listen with each other and listen to yourself as well. Like be kind to yourself, because it's a really tough world out there. The realities that we're facing, the issues that are rising. There's just never like really do what keeps your heart yearning. Even if it hurts, even if sometimes you fail a lot, if there's pain, if there's suffering, because this passion, it's not going to be in vain. It's going to be something that would really impact others, because it really came from yourself, knowing yourself, your individuality, and who you truly are, the truths that you're living, and how it affects other people's truths. And as long as that truth is kind, and that truth, the direction that you believe in forward would be kind for people and the planet, it would ripple out there. I've always, when I was young, I always thought, yeah, the summit is the summit, right? We were kind of trained to see the world into this huge mountain, and the goal is to reach that summit. Right. But when I kind of, I don't know, like a sense of fulfillment that once you get into the summit, you would see sunrise, and you started to realize that you're going to go down anyway, right? You're going to go down that mountain. So why the hell did you climb if it's hard, right? Why the hell did you even want to suffer with your legs and everything aching and getting cramps? And people say, I thought it was a journey. The journey is so important. You know, it's a climb, Miley Cyrus's song, just to keep it more youthful. But like, but I realized at the end that it's not even about the summit. The summit is a scam. And it's not sometimes even about the climb. It's really about the company, the people who you are with in this journey, and the communities that you would spend with that would give you the greatest meaning that you could ever find. And, you know, aspire to be part of a community that fosters that growth, that fosters that, you know, sense of purpose, that, you know, being purposeful to who you were with today, to the organizations that you're working with, to the person that you are, you know, and who you are, right? That will always go a long way.
Yeah, that's a very mindful way of thinking of that. Yeah. I think it also kind of helps us live each day like as it is rather than always looking forward to something. That's actually very helpful as someone that just hates cardio in general. Like the way you put that out, I really relate to that. Like I don't have to do this. Everything's painful. I'm walking up and I have to go down anyway. Those are embarrassingly, admittedly, I've said all those things out loud. So that's, but metaphorically speaking, that was actually very, very mindful. I've never looked at it that way. And I hope that's as insightful and eye-opening and comforting as well for a lot of people listening that also want to aim as high.
Don't even aim as high, you know?
Thank you so much for
I don't want to even say aim as high, because high is so overused, but really, like, you know, aim to find the truth that you are.
Right.
There's no summit, really. Like, as I've said, it's not about the summit. It's not about, you know, and achieving all these things or like being able to provide solutions. It's really about helping each other in the community, really helping about with each other day to day. And there's nothing, and I guess there's nothing wrong also with like looking at the future and looking at the past. These are both kind of things that are directions that you have to always be mindful of when you're already there. Because, you know, I overthink a lot too, you know, like overthinking about the past. Like nobody's perfect, you know, and that's it. We're all human, and just got to listen to each other.